These are unsettling times with inflation hitting people hard and resulting protests going on around the world. How well is our federal government handling the challenges? Well, joining us to discuss this is Rachael Thomas. She is the Member of Parliament for Lethbridge, Alberta. Rachael, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you back with us.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Rachael, inflation continues to drive prices up for Canadians. We're all feeling it, and it's making it a lot more difficult to keep our heads above water. So financially speaking, especially for those in the lower income brackets, any thoughts on how we got here and how to get out?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. And certainly it's top of mind for all Canadians. I don't think they need a whole lot of, official stats or experts speaking out on this. They feel it day to day in their lives and just being able to afford food and gasoline and the necessities of life. And so I'm certainly hearing from many, many constituents in my area who are speaking out about this. One woman wrote to me and she was telling me, she's got a great paying job. And in the past, she's enjoyed, taking several trips over the summer and being able to enjoy life and relax a bit with her family at a lake. But this year, she said, just with the cost of everything, it's nearly impossible. And so she'll just be staying home and that'll be that. I've heard from seniors who are having a hard time making ends meet because, of course, many of them live on a fixed income, and when your income is fixed but the cost of living goes up, of course, that becomes very challenging. I've heard from those who have a disability; they're in the same boat. They're living on a very small stipend, oftentimes, but still having to make that stretch through all of the necessities that they require. So it's certainly putting people in a really precarious situation. And you asked, how did we get here? What caused this? Why are Canadians, experiencing these unfortunate times? And I would say there's a couple of things. One would be, the prime minister made a decision to pump the economy with printed cash. In other words, basically fake money. As soon as you do that, it means that there is more money out there, but it's still going after a limited number of goods. The number of goods hasn't increased. And so when that's the case, it just drives up the cost of everything. And so, of course, that's having an impact on people. And the prime minister has been asked to stop putting the money in the economy. He's been warned by many experts, economists, but he continues to insist. The other thing I would observe is also the decision of the government to increase taxation. That certainly has an added burden on Canadians as well. So, for example, the carbon tax. So, when you fuel up at the pump, you're not just paying for the gasoline, but you're also paying for a penalizing tax that has been placed on that gasoline. And I think that's incredibly unfair to do that to Canadians when they're being pinched. You asked, how do we get out of this? How do we move forward? And I think the way we do that is, the government needs to exercise fiscal restraint, responsibility, balanced budgets. Debt needs to be paid back. But I think also, the Canadian people need to be believed in. And they need to be believed in to the extent that they're encouraged to, take great jobs, but not only take great jobs, but also create great jobs for others. So, in other words, industry needs to be encouraged to run at full force. Our economy needs to be up and roaring. And one of the ways we do that is by scrapping red tape and being invitational to those businesses and celebrating them rather than demonizing them, which is unfortunately what the prime minister is doing right now.
It's just been such a tough couple of years for everyone, for Canadians and all around the world too. And of course, the world is a busy place for various protests these days as well. So one thing that we should be paying attention to is the farmers' protest in Holland, as their government net zero climate policy will arbitrarily begin to shut down farmers. So two questions then, Rachael. Would such a protest actually be allowed here in Canada? And will our farmers, as well as our oil and gas companies, soon be facing similar policies?
Yeah, again, it's an interesting question, and I feel for our farmers because they are definitely in some hard times right now, and I think they have many questions in terms of where we're going as a country, where the prime minister is taking us. In the fall, he made a decision. The prime minister made a decision that Canada would reduce its fertilizer emissions by 30% by 2030. And he made this commitment without consulting with producers, farmers, or industry stakeholders, and really understanding the issues. And so I think that left farmers feeling voiceless, perhaps even powerless. And I think in many ways, feeling distraught and with damaged hope. And so, going forward, if the prime minister stays true to this, which it sounds like he will, in this demand, it's going to result in, a less crop yield, which means less food. It means higher prices at the grocery store. But I think, most importantly for us to understand is it also will result in starvation because Canada doesn't just feed its own country, Canada feeds, nations around the world. And when we put a policy in place like the one that Trudeau has brought forward, and it impacts yield, of course, we're going to feed our own people first. Of course, those who have money are going to be able to eat. But those that have less money or those that are not in Canada, where we would normally be able to ship our product to them, we will have less to be able to grant, which unfortunately will result in starvation in those other countries. And I think that's really sad. It's really devastating, and I hope Canadians take that to heart. Um, Furthermore, though, to your question, in terms of whether or not we could see those same types of protests here in Canada, certainly we've seen our farmers protest before. We saw this in 2015, where they drove their tractors to Parliament Hill and they protested lawfully, peacefully, respectfully, but they had their voices heard. I think what we saw as of late is that the current prime minister is very much opposed to any sort of protest that would draw, negative or unwanted attention to his policies or to his conduct, his decision making. And so I, I I wonder whether or not, farmers would be able to peacefully protest, lawfully protest in the same way that they did in 2015. I wonder if the prime minister would allow them to do that, or if he would just, invoke something like the Emergencies Act again and
Right.
prevent them from being able to have a voice on such an important issue. Again, not only on their behalf, but on behalf of us as Canadians who need to eat and to be able to afford those groceries. And furthermore, it would be a protest on behalf of the world and also their need to eat. And so, again, I can't say as to whether or not the prime minister would allow that to happen, but it would be my hope that, voices would be heard and that they would be respected.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. Looking at what happened with Ottawa, and Canada is just such a different place these days. It's crazy. So, Rachel, what needs to happen in order to open doors to export Canadian oil and natural gas to places that desperately need them overseas, like Germany, for example?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, certainly the the invasion of Ukraine has certainly brought this issue to the forefront where, Russia was the one that was providing, natural gas and oil to many of those European countries. And now, of course, that's hanging in the face. And uh, bottom line, Canada has the resources that these Eastern European countries need, that these European countries need, that the world needs. We have it. But we unfortunately have a government that is just unwilling to develop the industry. So ultimately, what I would say is, we need political will. We need leaders who see the amazing opportunity that exists to develop the oil and gas industry and to be the answer to so many places around the globe. Further to that, I would like to highlight that Canada has the greatest environmental standards in the world when it comes to oil and gas. In addition to that, we have incredible ethical standards and we have incredible human rights standards. We treat people with dignity and respect and provide them with high paying jobs. When countries like Germany are not provided with a resource from us, oil and gas from us, they will have to turn to places like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. And I can assure you that they do not have the same environmental standards. They do not have the same human rights track record. They do not have the same high paying jobs. They do not have the same ethical standards that we have in Canada. And so if we truly do believe in making a difference for the environment, in making a difference for people, then we should be developing this industry. And the way that we do that is by building pipelines and by encouraging stakeholders or investors to continue, investing, to continue. Development of this resource, and of course looking for markets.
Okay, switching gears here, Rachel, what's the latest on Bill C-11, the Internet Censorship Bill, of course, as it's known, and this could, of course, limit what everyday Canadians can see, hear, or say online?
Again, I really appreciate the question. Bill C-11, has I've invested a lot of time and energy into this piece of legislation and understanding it and fighting on behalf of Canadians and their freedom within the internet sphere. Ultimately, Bill C-11 is a piece of government legislation that will dictate to Canadians what they can see, hear, and post online. It's dangerous. It's dangerous because we treat the internet as a new public square, if you will. It's a place where the exchange of ideas takes place, and we expect that to be able to take place in a free and democratic way. Now the government is saying, well, actually, wait a minute, we'd like to have a say in terms of how ideas are rolled out there and what's acceptable and what's not, and what gets to be seen on the first page of a Google search versus what has to be pushed back to page 453. We want to determine as the government, what Canadians should or should not view. And so I think that's a really dangerous place. And many experts have come forward and said, this puts us down a very, slippery slope toward becoming like they have listed North Korea or China or Turkey, where, people's speech is not free. It's actually very much controlled by the government. And so again, there are many experts that have come forward and warned of these things. All that to say, Bill C-11, it was rushed through the House of Commons. It was forcefully pushed through committee, and then it was voted on. And so it did not, there was not rigorous debate that took place. There was not enough time put on hearing from witnesses or looking at each line of the bill in what's called clause by clause consideration. Instead, it was rammed through. What this does then is, of course, it puts the bill now in the hands of the Senate. And it will be up to the Senate to determine whether or not this bill gets to continue. And so, I guess what I would encourage is I would certainly encourage Canadians to have a say. I would encourage Canadians to use their voices because it matters. Oh, it so matters. And so, connect with senators. Make their concerns known. And I have a website set up called killbillc11.ca. And certainly it's super easy there to find all of the contact information for senators. It's just a click of a button. And I would encourage Canadians to fully engage.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's switch to tourism for a minute here. So the ArriveCAN app continues to create problems, leaving Canadians stranded and sometimes forcing fully vaccinated, healthy travelers into quarantine. So these delays caused by the app is also hindering tourism, not to mention the airline industry as well. We know all the problems happening there. But so, in spite of this, the federal government is claiming that 99% of air travelers are using the app successfully. So what do you say to that?
I say scrap the app. Very simply, I say scrap the app. I think we're seeing where it's causing problems for Canadians. There are there are still many folks out there without a smartphone. And so to be able to, go on and quickly download an app and fill out a form is just not doable. In addition to that, there are many seniors who love to travel and enjoy their golden years, and they might even have a smartphone, but it's just incredibly difficult for them to learn a new technology to download this app and to be able to fill it out and follow all the steps. And so they're meaning well, they're wanting to follow the rules, they're showing up at the border thinking that they have, or they're showing up thinking that perhaps a nice individual will assist them. And then they're finding quite the opposite. Instead, many of them are there's been tapes that have been released on social media and where we have seniors, being, I would say, severely mistreated as they're arriving in Canada and expected to produce this app, and they're not able to. And we're seeing where it's creating chaos. We're seeing where it's causing delays. We're seeing where Canadians are not being treated with dignity. And I think anytime we find ourselves in that situation, we need to take a step back and assess what's going on. And so I think, it's very clear that the app is causing a great deal of distress and problems. Again, not only for Canadians, but also for for airport authorities, for airlines, for many others involved. And so it's time to go. Scrap the app.
Okay, and of course, on the same vein as tourism, there a number of polls seem to indicate that a majority of Canadians want to see the government vaccine mandates and travel restrictions completely drop. So, as most countries around the world have done this, so why do you think the Liberals are keeping these restrictions in place?
uh, I've considered this, and I think it's hard to ascribe motive or to see logic. You rightly said, most developed countries around the world now have scrapped their mandates, and yet Canada still persists. We have numerous mandates in place when it comes to public transit, or transportation, or even engagement with folks in the federal workplace, etc. One of the interesting things is that Mr. Trudeau would like to put forward an image that says these regulatory burdens are being put in place in order to keep Canadians safe. But what we saw just recently in the last few days was actually that Mr. Trudeau, in his series of photo opportunities, was actually on a train with a group of other individuals and taking selfies without a mask. Well, if a mask is needed for other Canadians to travel safely, then I would think it's also required for the prime minister. And further to that, I would also expect the leader of our country, the highest position in the land, if you will, I would expect him to lead by example. And so I think what I observe in that then, and what I've heard from many Canadians, is they're observing his hypocrisy, and they're observing his commitment more than anything to image and maintaining a facade in many cases, rather than being committed to the true safety and well-being of Canadians.
Hmm.
And so I think Canadians, I think their trust is waning. I think most Canadians had no problem complying with the regulatory burden that was put on them, or the mandates that were placed upon them, because they saw some sense in them. They thought that it was a way back to normal. But I think at this point in time, many Canadians are just shaking their heads and just kind of wondering why. And unfortunately, then we're seeing that they have less and less trust in the government.
Thanks so much for your time today, Rachel. Looks like we are out of time here, but we always appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.